And we're fully live. We're live now? You're live. Okay. Welcome, everybody. We'll call the meeting to order. Can I have an approval of the agenda?
So moved.
Have a second?
I'll second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 5-0. We will go to public comment. So Myra, will you please read the public comments, or whomever is going to read them? Please?
Yes, Julie, Dr. Sinyard and I are going to read the comments we have for this evening. The first comment is from Martha Ash. Like many people responsible for school-age children, I am troubled by the decision to go full distance learning. It did not work in the spring, in spite of the Herculean effort on the parts of the teachers, the children, and the adults. How is a computer-based model going to be different than it was in the spring? Our teachers are gifted, but not necessarily in an ethereal medium. I can only imagine they shared in a generalized angst and disappointment. What advantages are there in keeping children enrolled in the district when there are professional computer-based modules available elsewhere, unless the instruction offered here is equal to or better than those programs?
Next comment is from Gloria Chia. I do not feel safe sending my son to school with this crisis. We have many family members in our household who are of high risk because of their age and health problems. I kindly ask that you please maintain online school.
Next comment is from Brian Abbott. It seems that you on the board never mention El Camino High School. I believe it has its own instructional minutes of 180 a week, not 240. Why is there never any mention of these neglected students and their imposed path? Do they receive a ranch diploma, or are they separate but equal from the moment they are not chosen for AVID because they lack support at home? It appears that they are hidden in a virtual academic ghetto, and none admit that it exists. There are never a mention of El Camino, except to say that the reason grad rates are up or down from time to time because of mid-year graduation or dropouts. Nowhere is there a mention of this school nor the requirements to enroll. It is not a program that has a school code or documentation requirements. As always, lacking except some funding info on the Lcff. Is money, hundreds of thousands of tax dollars per year, being used for the ranch and credit recovery that is designed for underserved youth at El Camino students? If more students in this hidden program are EL students that have chronic freshman failures in English, well, heck, all the core subjects, but thrive online, very low standardized test scores, i.e. reading level, mathematics. Is this systemic racism? Is this a way to take failing Rancho Cotati High School students off the books and use El Camino funding for the general population, denying students their resources? If online learning is a manner good enough for the rest of us, why not all of us? If students that fail normally thrive in this setting, why not use that model to stop gap recovery plan until the cohesive model can be magically divined? To be blunt, is El Camino high and academic ghetto? Good health and good wishes. May all who dream achieve.
The final comment is from Jenere Rodriguez Herrera. I am a parent writing to the board on behalf of devices that were handed out at my child's school today. A post surfaced in late morning that showed the computer department deliberately handing out devices without properly sanitizing or washing them down, on top of a year where we are to be stay-at-home teachers. It appears we also need to be sanitation experts too. I feel like this needs to be brought to light, and the individual responsible for potentially getting our students and families sick should be dealt with accordingly. Being told by a parent on Facebook that I need to take matters into my own hands is in poor taste and shows a huge oversight by the city.
Okay, those are the public comments we have this evening.
Oh, I'm sorry, Myra.
Yes.
I couldn't hear that last one.
Okay. Would you like us to reread it?
Well, I don't know. It was breaking up really badly on my phone. I don't know if it was doing that for other people.
Yeah,
If it wasn't
Julie.
doing it for other people.
No, it was Julie's was breaking up her comments a bit. I had the same issue.
Okay, I will reread the comment. It's from Jenere Rodriguez Herrera. I am a parent writing to the board on behalf of devices that were handed out at my child's school today. A post surfaced in the late morning that showed the computer department deliberately handing out devices without properly sanitizing or washing them down. On top of a year where we are to be stay-at-home teachers, it appears we also need to be sanitation experts too. I feel like this needs to be brought to light, and the individuals responsible for potentially getting our students and families sick should be dealt with accordingly. Being told by a parent on Facebook that I need to take matters into my own hands is in poor taste and shows a huge oversight by the city.
Was that better? Did everyone hear that?
Yeah, it was a little better.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Lef, you're on mute.
There, does it work better now? You can't read my lips. I'm sorry.
Much better.
We're going to go to number 4, board services for the budget study session. And what I said was, does Robert have this all together, or are you guys going to tag team on this?
Well, I'm gonna turn over to Robert in a minute. I just this is an opportunity for us to update you on our most current situation with our budget. We have new information from the last time that we've spoken about the budget, and we want to remind everyone that really this is an information item for us to discuss. And if you have any questions, and we know that this is complex, the budget is complex, and we're not going to be able to solve the problem this evening. But we really want an opportunity to share with the board where we are and then talk about possible next steps. And now I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Markall.
Thank you. Good evening. Mike, do you mind bringing up the presentation, please? Great. Next slide. Okay, so as Dr. Perez stated, really just the purpose of this meeting is really the intent is just to update the board on our 2021 budget and really from the final impact from the state budget. I think the last budget information we shared with the board and publicly is when we adopted our budget, and there's been quite a bit of changes and information there. And I think more importantly, we want to see how that information with the final state budget, how it's going to impact our budget, not only for current year, for the next 2 years out. And I think also the intent here is really to correct any misconceptions. And I think you'll see what I mean by that when we start talking about the final budget and some things that could be interpreted one way, and then in reality, what does that mean for us in our budget? It's the opportunity for the board to gain insight. I think, as you probably would agree, the more we delve into the nuances of the budget and some of the driving factors, the more insight that you gain on the budget. And then obviously give the opportunity for you to ask some questions on that. And ultimately, we want to be able to develop a plan to move forward with that. And as Dr. Perez said, remember that this is not intended to fix our budget. I think the tendency is for us to go in and start going into, well, let's fix it mode, but we won't do that tonight. We won't be, we won't not be able to do that tonight. So I just want to remind everybody what the purpose of the meeting is. And then again, it was really just that informational and a chance to ask some questions. Next slide, please. So I want to back up a little bit to the second interim budget that was approved by the board on March 10th, 2020. At that time, as you probably don't remember, but I want to refresh your memory, we do our multi-year projections. So we're not only looking at our current year, but we're looking at 2 years out. which would include the current budget year that we're in. So that was our look forward at that time. And at that time, for the budget year 2021, we had a 2.29% COLA was estimated. We did have a slight decline in enrollment projected, but the net result from the LCFF formula, we were looking at an increase of about approximately $603,000. Now, in the scheme of things, that's not a lot of money, but it was a positive, and we want to point out at that time what we were looking at. For the third year of the projections, 2.71 COLA, continuing with a slight decline in enrollment of 20, and that gave us a much more higher amount of potential funding of $1.1 million, almost 1.2. At that time, also in the second year of the projections, 2021, we were projecting a $1.5 million deficit at that time. But between now and the end of the year, we did come up with a solution for that. We aligned our staffing, reduced the staffing to align with our formula due to the declining enrollment. And we also made some other reductions and in order to capture savings of $1.5 million. So as I'm telling everybody, when the times that I've done this presentation, it's been a couple times now in one form or another, but that was our 30 seconds where we had a balanced budget for 2021. Before my next comment, I just want to remind the board that we had previously made other reductions in the 1920 school year of $1.5 million. So we've already cut $3 million out of the budget over the last 2 years. And then COVID-19, about that time, all that was coming down, and we knew there would be some impact on the economy, but I don't think anybody fully knew or would have had guessed that we would be in the environment that we're in and what the ultimate impact was on the state economy. Next slide, please. So now we go to the adopted budget, and that was presented to the board on June 23rd, 2020. And at that time, we were in the midst of the bad news coming down from the state. As you know, with the May revision, that was our look of information we were getting from the state at that time. And we were looking at really significant cuts, 10% to the LCFF revenues. At that time, we were estimating that was about $5.45 million of loss of LCFF funding. And the 10% was for school districts across the state. But for us, in addition to the 10% cut, we also had the ongoing funding loss from the Grayton Ranchera Casino, $1.2 million. That continues to be a loss of ongoing funding for us, and we still do not know when that funding, if and when it will resume. So total loss, $6.65 million. And we were at that time, information, we were told the board about it. May revision is what we had to build our budget off of. And at that time, the multi-year projections indicated that we would barely meet the 3% minimum, and then we would fall significantly short in the 2 out years in the budget. Along that same time, we started hearing information back as part of the budget process. The governor does the May revision, and then the state legislature, both the Senate and the House, they go out and work on their own versions of the budget. And they both came back at that time and were basically saying we're rejecting the governor's May revision cuts. But we didn't have any other information at that time. Next slide, please. So the final state budget was signed by Governor Newsom on June 29, 2020. Part of the Ed Code requires that we revise our budget, the district budgets, for any significant changes within 45 days based on the final state budget. Well, there definitely were some significant changes in that. The governor had agreed to many of the changes and recommendations from the legislature. And the main thing in there was not to significantly cut funding to public schools. He wanted to do that. Basically, they didn't have additional money from what they were estimating, but they wanted to implement some very large and significant cash deferrals, and which go across multiple years. The other pieces in there that we're going to talk about in a few minutes here, there were a couple things and phrases that they were throwing out: zero COLA, flat funding, ADA hold harmless. And ultimately, those are a couple things that were in there, and we're going to talk a little bit about those in a minute. In addition to that, the final state budget include legislation that prohibited school districts from laying off certain certificated and classified employees for the year. Considering that we are about 80% of our budget is tied into staffing, knowing that we would potentially be losing ongoing funding, it really is one of those things that ties our hands for the 2021 school year. In addition to that, we did know with certainty that we were going to be getting federal funds. We'll talk a little bit about that also. And the one thing I want to focus on with that right now is that we were getting more funding than we initially had anticipated on that. They changed some of the formulas on that to give more money to every school district and not just some. Next slide, please. So in addition, the final state budget include restoration of some categorical programs that were slated to be cut, which was good news. And some of the things that he wanted to do actually in January and in May was to increase the base rate for special ed, which was good news. And then the other pieces in there is he wanted to add triggers to reduce the deferrals. So what that meant is any additional funding from the federal government, rather than going out to school districts, it would first be used to reduce the deferrals. And I think that's important to keep in mind as we move forward. And Ed Code also was created for a new report that we have to do, the one-year learning continuity and attendance plan, unfortunately also called LCAP to make it more confusing. And that's going to include in there the spending of our federal care funds, how we're doing that. And the board will see that. They will need to adopt it by September 30th, 2020. Next slide. So here's where I really want to focus in on a few things, because the two phrases in there, the ADA hold harmless, zero COLA, and the hold harmless piece. Does this actually mean that our funding is going to stay the same for 1920? So initially, when I heard the news and what the governor's budget entailed, my brain started going, well, we're not getting any additional COLA, and we're going to be held harmless for our ADA. Well, we should be getting the same level of dollars, the same level of funding as we did in 1920. Next slide, please. So I want to show you why that's not true. So does ADA hold harmless and zero COLA, does that equal same funding for 2021? So I want to walk you through a couple things, and I think the board is aware of some of the things on here, but I think it's important that we go back over it. First of all, at second interim for the 1920 school year, this is what our Lcff calculation looked like. That's on the screen there. It was based on ADA for 1819. And if you recall, we get to use, under declining enrollment, we get to use the higher of the current year or prior year. And this is important. And you can see also in the box there, it gives the base rate per grade spans in there, and that would be applying the 2.29% COLA, or excuse me, that was a different COLA, but it was applied there to increase the base rate in those amounts. So the things we want to remember again, declining enrollment, funding is based on the higher of current or prior year. And in 1920, the ADA, it was based on 1819 ADA. So 2021 funded ADA will be based on the P2 for 1920, which is a lower amount. Next slide. So what does that mean then? Well, it means when you actually look at our estimated funding at second interim, the ADA is going to be based on a lower amount. The first part of this slide has the 2.29% COLA and how the formula plays out. But you can see where we're at now after the governor's final budget. Now we apply a 0% COLA to that. The base rates drop back down to the 1920 levels, but our ADA is actually at a lower amount than the 1920 funded ADA. Next slide. So what does that mean? So we're going to look at a couple ways that this is impacting us. First of all, we have our change in expected revenues. And this is our planning number. This is where we were at second interim. And now we see a pretty significant change from our LCF funding from what we estimated and planned for at second interim. For 2021, our second interim, we were looking at 53,701,774. And now at the 45-day budget revision, that number drops to 52,553,896. And that's almost a $1.2 million decrease in funding on that. And when you look then at 21-22, that change of funding goes up $2,500,000. So it's pretty significant. And the thing I want to remind the board on here is when you're applying COLA to the base amount or to the base amount in the formula, it has a compounding effect because that base will increase each year. And then you apply the COLA the next year, and then the base goes up higher, and then you apply it again, it's higher. So the fact though that we're going to be having zero COLA that's projected over the next 3 years means our funding is not going to have that base and compounding effect. In fact, it's going to remain pretty flat. And there are some little other nuances in the formula, and it's actually going to result in some slight decrease in funding. 21-22, we're projecting $157,000 decrease in funding from prior year. And in 22-23, $230,000. So next slide, please. Okay, so I want to show you a few more things, but I want to remind the board here on what are key and how we're looking at fiscal solvency. And as you recall, this slide's probably pretty familiar to the board. They've seen it a few times in different presentations, but it's something we need to keep on our radar. So AB 1200 requires us to prove fiscal solvency and to certify our budget. That's what the board does at first and second interims, and at budget adoptions, we're looking at our projections. And anytime we do a negotiated salary, we also need to do that certification. And fiscal solvency is determined by the final unrestricted, and it's important to remember it's unrestricted dollars, not restricted, general fund reserve level plus Fund 17, which is for us, and that it needs to be a minimum of 3% in the current budget year and the 2 subsequent years. If you recall, 2 years ago, we were projecting a deficit and we had a qualified budget at that time. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you, Mike. Just a reminder of the certifications. We always want to have a positive certification. Qualified means that we may not meet our obligations in the current or subsequent. And the negative means we will not be able to meet the obligations. Next slide. Okay, so what's on this slide here is a copy of the multi-year projections. This is a format that we presented to the board in the past, and it's kind of what I like to call the down and dirty multi-year projections. It looks different than what the board will see in the unaudited action, in the budget reports that are submitted, the first and second interim adopted budget. But this gives a really good snapshot on what we're really looking about here. If you recall, in a previous workshop, I reminded the board that if there's anything you really want to focus on a multi-year projection, it's two areas. You want to look to see, do you have a surplus or a deficit, meaning you're spending more than you're bringing in, or you're spending less than you're bringing in. And then we also want to look then towards the bottom of the form at our AB 1200 reserve percentage. It must be 3%. Are we above that? And in this scenario here, I have another bullet, another highlight here, and that's restricted reserves. And the reason I'm looking at it this way, because we are slated to get $4.3 million in federal care funds, and those are restricted, so they don't count towards your AB 1200 reserve percentage. But when you look at it, right now we have revenues booked, but we don't have any of the expenditures fully in the budget yet. So it gives this false impression when you look at this with the surplus for 2021, it looks like we have a surplus of $3.2 million. Well, I wish that was true, but what's happening is the federal dollars are kind of clouding the picture there. So next slide, please. And so here's what I want to pull out the federal dollars, and this gives us a little bit clearer picture of really where we're at. So when we go back to the two keys on the slide, the surplus and deficit, we're looking at now a deficit of $1.1 million for 2021. That number grows to 1.9 in 21-22 and goes up to $3.6 million deficit in 22-23. So obviously, with those levels of deficit spending, unless you have a really large reserve, you're going to get into trouble really quick. And as you can see down at the bottom with the AB 1200 reserve percentage, we go from a 4.8% in 2021, and then in 21-22, we're below the 3% at 1.79, and then it drops to a negative percentage in 22-23. So remember, our funding is flattened out. We're getting less than what we did in the prior year, significantly less than what we thought at second interim. And then the additional 2 years, our funding actually drops a little bit. But what you'll see in another slide is our estimated expenditures don't level off. The other part I wanted to point out on this slide, there's two things. First of all, this is a draft. And the reason it's a draft at this point, we're continuing to work on this. This will be next board meeting on the 18th. We will be presenting the 45-day budget revision. And at that time, we will have completed all of the work to kind of see where we're at that time. If you've seen this information in the other presentation that we did, then the numbers are different because we're continuing to work on this and try to come up with some, we're just continuing to work on it. The other part on here is at this time of year, that beginning balance in 2021, that's an estimated amount. We won't know that amount until we close the books, close on and do unaudited actuals. That number will go up, the $2.3 million. And the thing I want you to be aware of, the number will go up and it'll have an impact on our reserve percentage for whatever amount that is for the unrestricted side. It'll increase the reserve percentage, but it'll have no bearing on the deficit. So that's important to keep in mind. So the numbers are going to continue to change, and what you'll see at the board meeting in the 18th is going to be a little bit more refined than where we're at now. We're continuing to work on this. Next slide, please. So here's something we want to keep in mind, and you've seen this slide before, and it's important because we want to be able to make sure the expenses that we're estimating, we know expenses are going to go up. We know we have step and column for both certificated and classified. We know STRS is going to go up, even though we did get some relief in the final budget with that. But we'd also know they're going to continue to go up the following year. We also know that health and welfare is going to increase also. So those are things that we build into our projections. And those are things we need to ensure that we have enough increase in funding to pay for those. And what you can see here is in 21-22, we do have an increase of funding, LCFF funding, the negative amount, 157,000, but we got $680,000 in projected expenses. And so you can see, we're already short $837,000. And the following year, that number goes up to $1.6 million, where we're going to spend more than what we have in additional funding. I want to point out a couple things on here, particularly with the STRS and PERS. If you go down towards the bottom, it gives some of the assumptions on there. You can see the STRS rate in 2021 at 16%, and that's partially due to the fact that they lowered the rates in the final state budget, which was welcome news. But you can see it's a pretty significant jump up to 18.1%. So it goes from 16% and projected in 22-23, 18.10%. And that's a $575,000 projected increase just in the STRS alone. And for PERS, it's also going to have some significant jumps in there, and that's going to go up another $211,000 right there. Next slide, please. Okay, let me talk a little bit about federal funds. I don't want to focus too much on here other than to say we did get more money than we had anticipated in May. As I mentioned, they did change the way that it was being distributed, and which gave more money to all school districts. The thing I want to remind everybody is these are restricted general fund dollars. So unfortunately, we cannot use them for general purposes or to offset revenue reductions. Back in May, when we found out we were going to be cut the 10%, they said, well, you're going to get some federal dollars, and I was hoping we'd be able to use that to offset some of the revenue reductions, and that turned out not to be the case. So we are getting money. Some of it is allocated with the intent to provide funding for impact of COVID-19. And we're slated to get about $511,000 on that. I also want to look at the timeline for that, because we do have through September 30th, 2022 to spend those dollars. And we can actually go back to March 1st and capture any of the expenditures that we may have had for that. Next slide. The other part of the federal funds we're getting is the learning loss mitigation. This is a lot more money than we had anticipated and in May. And this is where they did a lot of the shifting on how that money would be allocated. And we're looking at $3,687,000 on that. And again, it's restricted. We have certain areas that we can spend those dollars on. But the part here that's really troubling in here is if you notice the timeline to spend those dollars. March 1st, 2020 to December 30th, 2020. So it's a short timeline to spend a lot of dollars, and it has to be in those areas. Can't use it to offset funding losses that we have. And so it's troubling. One, they didn't give us more money that we can use with more flexibility, and it's a very short timeline to spend those dollars. Next slide. Okay, that's all the information I have for the board. I kind of want to talk to you a little bit about the next steps and kind of leading up to where we're at this point. We did have an informal meeting with all of the 3 bargaining units on August 4th, and the intent was to let's bring everybody together and let them know what we're dealing with as far as the loss of ongoing revenues and how significantly it changed from what we thought we had in March. We're doing the board workshop now. That was the next phase and their next step. And then the next thing is on August 18th, as I talked about, we will be presenting the 45-day budget revision. And there's been a little bit of a change on what Sonoma County Office of Education's expectations are. They know that the change on the funding is going to be pretty significant for a lot of school districts. So what they're asking us to do is to give them a copy of the budget revision. We need to do a multi-year projections and a cash flow, which we generally don't have to do as part of the 45-day revision. So on the August 18th board meeting, I just wanted to point out that we will include the normal monthly budget revision item that we have every month, and that will only be for revisions through July, and that'll continue to be a consent agenda item. But we'll also have a separate item that the board will, for approval, the 45-day revision. At that time, we'll be presenting more up-to-date information. And I think at that time, I'm hoping we'll be able to have a clearer picture on really where we're at with the level of deficits, kind of that target number that we're going to need to shoot for. First interim still will be presented still in December. At the board meeting, we'll be presenting for that. It's likely at that time we're going to have a qualified budget again. And like in the past, we're going to have a draft fiscal recovery plan either at that meeting or probably no later than second interim in March. So a ton of information. Does the board have any questions that I can answer?
Robert, this is Tim. Could I ask a question?
Yes.
Oh, in regard to the restricted CARES funding, more and more scientists are noting that because the virus is airborne, which means it circulates through rooms, that ventilation upgrades are absolutely critical to preventing outbreaks like we're seeing in Georgia and elsewhere, Israel. Can any of that restricted CARES funding be used for ventilation upgrades at our sites if the board decides to go that route?
Yeah, Tim, that's a good question, and we're currently looking at that throughout the district, and we're looking at several things on that, including the types of filters that we use. We actually do use a filter that's a little higher grade than what's generally the standard for that. Josh is doing a good job of looking in to kind of the driving factors. You allude to some scientists. There's other sides that may not have that same viewpoint. So we're really trying to get to how we can keep our campuses safe and what the best that we can do for that. So right now we've changed all the filters, and we're looking into options to maximize our indoor air quality. So it's on our radar. But to answer your question, we can't use this for capital. So it isn't like we would be able to go through and replace our air conditioners or that type of thing. But we may be able to use some of the money for the COVID if we need to do some upgrades, minor upgrades to the types of filters, that types of thing. So it's on our radar, and we're looking at it.
Okay,
Robert,
thanks,
do you know
Robert.
what micron we're using now? I know we raised them up during the first fires.
Yeah, I understand it's called a MERV, and the standard that most people use and for our equipment that we have is a MERV 8, and we're using 10s right now. They do have a higher grade, but they create less airflow, and the less airflow could actually be counterproductive to what we're trying to do here, and it could also be damaging to our equipment. So, again, we're looking at this, and we want to do what we can, but we also want to make sure that what we're doing is going to meet the needs in the most efficient way.
So would it be possible, are we using some of the CARES restricted funds right now to buy technology like laptops, et cetera?
Yes, that's one of the allowable expenses technology.
So that might free up some of the bond money that we had just in, I think, February, if memory serves, that we had basically allocated to do some more upgrades. We might be able to shift some of those funds around.
Well, as you know, the amount of funding that we do have through there, we have to be managing that. I think the equipment that we recently bought was a little ahead of our timetable, and we're doing it mainly due to restricted to the excuse me, to the COVID outbreak. And so it's something we can definitely look at, but I don't think we were planning on buying as much equipment as we did. Our laptops is what we did. So that may change our plan a little bit on how we're going to move forward.
So it's possible that the laptops we just purchased, the 1,000 Chromebooks, could come out of the CARES restricted funds?
Yeah, and that's the plan, because that is an allowable expense, and it's really related strictly to distance learning. So we can build a strong case for that, and that's the plan, to spend those dollars or for those.
Robert, another question about the CARES funding, because I don't know, have we seen a list from you of what it can be used for? I mean, you say it can't be used for capital improvements. Could it be used for purchasing online curriculum?
Oh, absolutely, and that's part of what we're doing. So right now we're, as part of, as you know, things continue to change. We just learned a couple weeks ago we were going fully in the distance learning. So we're gearing up and getting what we need for the instruction, to do the proper instruction for distance learning. But we also need to be careful that we're just not spending to spend. We want to be wise in our purchases. We want to make sure it's something that's not only within the realm of the money that we have, but also it's something that we're going to be able to, it's going to get our best bang for our buck in what we're doing.
So this 3.6 remaining out of the 4.3 is, from what I understand from your presentation just now, we have to spend that by 12/31/20.
Correct. 12/30.
Okay.
It's actually 12/30. I don't know why it's not 12/31, but.
Okay.
Are there any questions on the budget or in the information that I presented?
Yeah, I have a question, Robert Lcff. You go back to your multi-year projections. You say
Sure.
our ending balance is going to be 2.3 or 2,365,000, and you'll know within a week. Are we closing out the books in a week?
Oh, no, that number will not be known in a week.
Okay.
What I'm basically saying is the other information, we're continuing to work on our budget. We're looking at other areas that we possibly can get some savings, whether it's one time or ongoing. As you go in and close the books, you can see, you learn a little bit more about what you spent last year and what you didn't spend last year. And that helps us true things up a little bit. So we're continuing to work on it. And at the time we present the 45-day budget, I'm going to, let the board know some of the changes and some of the things that we have in there. But we're looking at lots of different areas.
So if you go back to your slide, the multi-year projections, I'm looking at the paper copy here.
Yeah, Mike,
For
do you mind backing up a few steps here? Right there. Thank you.
There. So we're going to spend $1,116,000 more than our revenue and reduce our reserve down that amount from 2.3, and hopefully that 2.3 will go up. Folks. So are we planning as we go forward this year, when do we have to address, or how are reductions going to be addressed so that we don't continue in a downward spiral?
Well, part of it is we're looking at current year now, and so I think some of the things we're looking at and considering, which could include a hiring freeze on positions that are vacant at this time. We're looking at those things that are going to be different under the distance learning model. So there's certain things we're going to look, and I think we're going to be able to capture some savings in the current year. But how we move forward and what that looks like as far as a committee or whatnot, how we do, I think our main focus is going to be on the out years in the 21, 22, and 22, 23 years. What's pretty clear in my mind is we're not going to solve the problem in 1 year. And for us to be able to cut $2 million out of our budget in 21, 22, when we've already cut 3 million over the last 2 years, is going to be a tall order. So what I would be recommending is that we kind of look at it as a multi-year and tackle it, that we can do certain amount in 21, 22 and a certain amount in 22, 23, and then kind of see where we're at. Things are going to continue to change. We're hopeful that the economy turns around, we start getting some COLA, that type of thing in the years. But at this point, we can't count on that. We have to plan as if we don't have that. But again, it's a multi-year problem that we're looking at. And I think that's how we're going to need to address it.
So we're going to basically, once you enter those expenses, excuse me, Les, Robert, we're going, that 4.8% that we have in reserves is going to basically go negative per se, right? I mean, if you're deficit spending, it's coming out of your reserve.
When you say negative, are you talking about the future years?
Well, I'm looking at this year where we don't have all of the expenses booked. So we've got the available reserves for that calculation, that 3.12, but we don't have all the expenses in, correct?
The expenses we don't have in are restricted, related to the federal dollars, and those will not impact our reserve. That's why I wanted to pull them out, because it kind of clouds the picture, really what we're looking at.
Yeah, one of your slides earlier said we were barely going to meet the 3%. So you expect that 4.8% we're looking at for 2021 to be right around 3%?
No, I'm actually expecting that number to go up. And the reason is there's two things. One, we're continuing to look at the current year and looking at ways we can save some dollars. And in addition to that, and we'll know a little bit more about that at the next board meeting when we do the 45-day revision. But we'll also, when we close the books, that beginning balance is going to go up, and whatever unrestricted portion of that is actually going to increase our reserve level and our reserve percentage on that. So that number is going to change, and I expect it to actually go up a little bit before we get to, as we move along at first interim.
Okay, so you mentioned hiring freeze and no new hires, but you did say you qualified that with no new hires to fill currently empty positions. We're not looking to create any new positions at this point, correct?
I don't see that we would, unless they're directly related to something we're going to be doing in distance learning, and it's something that we would be able to use the dollars for. The problem with that is this December date, which means you can only do something up until that time. Right now, we're not looking at creating any new positions, no.
Okay, so would this be a good opportunity for us to, I know with all the other million things that are going on, to take a look at how we're going to tackle our systemic structural deficits?
Yes, and that would be part of how we move forward. So again, we're hoping to get a little direction here from the board on what this will look like as far as if we're going to do a committee. My recommendation would be that we would not do a full-blown budget committee with the amount of people that we had in the prior committees, only because we're going to have to do this via Zoom. And if you have 20 plus people, it's going to make it very difficult to do anything. And we do need representation. We do need some input on these things. And so a smaller committee, I think, would serve us better.
Yeah,
So
I
I'm
like the
assuming
idea of
that
a smaller committee and
Sorry,
putting Chris and Les on that smaller committee to look at the structural deficit. But just one quick question about your multi-year formulation is, didn't you say that you had a projected loss of 20 students? Was that for 21, 22?
That's correct. Actually, in our projections, we have the 20 and 20 and 20 in both years. Now, one of the things, this is where the ADA hold harmless will benefit us in the outer years, because we're still going to use the 1920 ADA, funded ADA for next year, or this year and next year. So we
Yeah,
get,
that's what I
We-
wanted. That's you anticipated my follow-up, because that's what I wanted to ask you is, what would happen if we had a bigger loss?
you mean as far as enrollment and funding?
Well, yeah, you said a modest loss of, I think you used the word modest, I can't remember, of 20 students. So what would happen if it was larger? I mean, is that good to use a modest figure of 20?
Well, at this time, it's irrelevant, because our funding's not going to be based on anything. It's not going to be based on that number because of the ADA
Okay.
hold harmless. Future years, I mean, we're going to have to see what the impact is of the COVID, and whether there's going to be any impact on our enrollment over time. But that's a future discussion, and it's something we definitely need to keep our eye on.
So Robert, we get the hold harmless through the 22-23 school year, according to your multi-year.
That's correct. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if we feel a loss, it's going to be in the 23-24 year.
That's correct. And I think one of the things that I started looking at it, and for those districts that are declining naturally, which we could be one of, but also those that may be hit more significantly with the change in environment right now, there could be a cliff that they're gonna have to, that they will fall off on. The one thing also is for those districts that are actually increasing, their funding is also going to be locked at a hold harmless, so they will not get any additional funding. So if for some reason our funding, we get a lot more students, and we're increasing in our ADA, our enrollment, we won't feel the benefit of that either until 23, 24.
Yeah, I was reading a lot of school districts who, there's a couple actually that are suing the state because they have increased their enrollment and they're not getting any additional funds, so they're not very happy.
Right.
I also heard that of the 157,000 school districts in the United States, they're estimating about 130-something thousand are all in the same situation. It doesn't help us at all, but something's going to have to change somewhere on a much larger scale, I think, than the local districts, if this is happening nationwide at this kind of a level.
Right.
About education funding. My last question is, how and when do you think that you will be presenting areas of potential budget reductions? Is that going to come from whatever the budget committee ends up, whatever we decide to do?
Yes, there will be a couple things we're looking at now, but not finalized. And if we feel those are things that we can move into the current year, there'll be one-time savings, but it will help. And those will be discussed with the board at the August 18th meeting. Other than that, then I think unless something jumps out at us, I think the committee the committee will be the one. We're going to work on those things together and come up with some solutions. So it's not going to be an easy task because we've already cut $3 million in the past 2 years. So any low-hanging fruit is long gone.
Right.
So any questions from Jennifer or Joe?
No, I got the information I need.
Jennifer?
I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Okay, so what I'd like to do, I'd like to get input from Myra and Robert and the district how would you propose this committee to be made up of?
You know, we really believe that we'd like to have a smaller committee just because of the nature of it being virtual. So we were discussing possibly today, kind of our ideas is anywhere between 10 and 15. We just want to keep it to a manageable size. So that's what our thinking was. And really, we would like it to reflect, you know, we'd like to have parents on there. We'd like to have some central office and then some administrators. Central office, because we have people that can answer the questions about, you know, some of the details of the budget. But that was our thought, was to have a smaller group. And as Robert has already set, you know, looked at, we're looking at positions that are open and seeing what we can possibly capture. What do we need to fill and what can we leave open at this time so that we can capture some savings? And then really working with our site principals to see if there's anything else, you know, are there possible positions that we could freeze temporarily since we're on distance learning? But we really want to, we want to include people in the process because we know that, you know, we may not have all the information. We may have some very good ideas, but we don't know what each site needs. We don't know, you know, all the details. So we want to be able to get that input. So that was our thought, anywhere from 10 to 15 people.
And the structure of that, people, you got to give me some.
Okay.
Yeah.
It would be some cabinet level would be Dr. Senior, Mr. Marcall, myself. And then we talked about having possibly an elementary principal and a secondary principal.
Okay.
And then we talked about having, you know, an elementary parent and a secondary parent.
Okay.
Have I forgotten anyone? Did I include everybody?
Our bargaining teams.
On our bargaining team. Sorry, how could I forget our bargaining teams, our you know, our union presidents.
And then Lef and I hope.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Krista.
Okay.
My apologies.
That's okay. Yeah, we're probably about 12 to 15 right there.
Mhm. That's what our thought was.
Okay.
Okay.
Any questions or concerns about that from anybody?
No, but we probably better schedule it as soon as possible.
Well, too, it's Robert, you know, what's your time frame? Is this 3 months before we make recommendations, or is this an ongoing thing that, you know, we hit milestones in 3 months, we hit more milestones in 6 months to get things accomplished and start the wheels rolling for changes that are going to have to affect, you know, the out years?
So first interim, at that time, I think it'd be nice to have a draft fiscal recovery plan, or at least a few things on that list. We're going to be qualified at that time, I feel, regardless. And if we can come up with a draft fiscal recovery plan, a multi-year plan for second interim that we can actually put into our projections, we may not have a qualified budget at second interim. So that would be December is going to be our timeline for first interim. So I think we can get the committee started within the next couple weeks, and then shoot for December to have some sort of draft recommendations.
Okay, that helps me. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert.
Sure.
Okay. All right, any other questions? Any other input?
Yeah, Lef, are we going to have an opportunity to talk about future agenda items?
Next week, I think.
We can't mention them today.
Do we do that at a special board meeting? Help me, people.
I thought we've done that before.
No, Jennifer's
Because
shaking
it's not
her
an
head no.
agenda.
So I think
It's
we
not
could.
agenda item.
Tim, why don't you offline send those to me and I'll review it with Myra, please?
All right, thanks.
Okay. If nothing else, are we about to adjourn this meeting? Am I leaving anything out?
No.
No? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Myra.
Thank you.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you guys for all your hard work.
Okay,
Thank you.
we'll
Thank
see you in a
you.
week.
See you in a week. Thank
All
you.
right, see you later.
Thank you.
All right, bye.
Bye.